Sometimes, one ordinary moment can change everything. A simple traffic stop, a routine check. But that night, what was about to happen would shake the entire city. A police officer thought he was in control of the game, but he had no idea. His target wasn't just another man. It was someone who, with a single signature, could destroy his entire career. The city streets glowed under the dim orange lamps. A sleek black luxury car moved steadily down the nearly empty highway. It was 11:30 p.m., the kind of night where silence wrapped around every corner. Inside the car sat a black man, calm and composed, listening to the soft hum of the radio. To anyone watching, he looked like just another driver heading home after a long day. Yet there was something about him. A quiet authority, a presence that couldn't be ignored. A few yards ahead, parked at the roadside, sat Officer Jackson in his patrol car. His eyes locked on the black vehicle the moment it appeared. He'd been waiting for this chance. His mind wasn't on serving justice. It was on executing a plan he had carried for days. His lips curled into a thin smile. Tonight, he thought, he'd teach someone a lesson. Jackson reached for his radio and muttered, "Suspicious vehicle approaching. I'll check it out." Red and blue lights flashed, slicing through the darkness. The black car slowed, then pulled to the side without resistance. The driver didn't panic, didn't rush. He rolled down the window smoothly, his calm movements contrasting with the officer's tense body language. "License and registration," Jackson barked, his voice laced with authority. The man didn't speak. He simply reached into his wallet, pulled out his documents and handed them over. His eyes, steady and unflinching, met the officer's. For a moment, Jackson felt as though those eyes could see right through him. The officer scanned the papers, then smirked. "Nice car. Expensive. How does someone like you afford it?" The man's reply was short, firm. "Hard work." 2 words, simple, but the confidence behind them struck Jackson like a blade. He hated it. The calmness, the pride, the refusal to be intimidated. To him, this wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. It was about power, about control. Jackson's jaw tightened. He had already decided this man wouldn't walk away free tonight. He'd make sure of it. "Step out of the car," Jackson ordered. The driver gave a faint smile, opened the door, and stepped out. His movements were slow, deliberate. There was no fear on his face. If anything, he looked prepared. The road stretched silently around them. A cold wind rustled through the trees, the shadows stretching longer under the flashing police lights. Jackson moved quickly to the car, swinging the door open. He pretended to search the interior, but his hand slipped into his pocket. Hidden inside was a small plastic bag, drugs. This was his plan, his trap, his ticket to control. With a swift motion, Jackson shoved the bag under the dashboard. Then, with fake triumph, he shouted, "Well, well, well! What do we have here?" He pulled the packet into the air, raising his voice as though he had uncovered solid proof. But the man didn't react. He didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't even flinch. His eyes remained calm, steady, almost amused. Jackson felt his chest swell with arrogance. He thought he had won. To him, this was another criminal caught, another notch of authority. But the stillness on the man's face, the quiet strength in his silence, carried a different story. And somewhere deep down, even the viewers could sense it. Something wasn't right. The officer thought he had cornered his prey. But in truth, the prey was about to become the hunter, and the question hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Who exactly is this man? And why isn't he afraid? The flashing red and blue lights bathed the scene in eerie colors. The lonely road felt like a stage, and Officer Jackson played his part with arrogant confidence. To him, this wasn't just another arrest. It was a performance. He wanted dominance. He wanted control. The black man stood quietly at the side of the road, hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply watched, his eyes locked on the officer with a calmness that made Jackson uneasy. But Jackson brushed that feeling away. He was in control, or at least he thought he was. He clutched the small bag of drugs he had planted moments earlier and waved it like a trophy. "Looks like we got ourselves a dealer," he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The man tilted his head slightly, almost as if he were studying a child throwing a tantrum. Then he spoke, his voice low but firm. "You're making a mistake." Jackson froze for half a second. Something about those words carried weight, like a warning more than a plea. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. He barked out a laugh, trying to shake off the unease. "A mistake? No. The mistake was yours. Driving this car, thinking you could get away with it. People like you always slip up." The silence that followed was louder than the officer's words. The black man didn't flinch. He didn't protest. He didn't even blink. That quiet defiance gnawed at Jackson. He wanted to see fear. He needed to see fear. "Turn around," Jackson ordered harshly, pulling out his handcuffs. The man didn't resist. He simply turned, hands behind his back as though this was routine. Jackson cuffed him tightly, almost too tightly, savoring the click of the metal locking shut. He shoved the man against the hood of the car, pressing down with unnecessary force. To Jackson, this was victory. To the man, it was just the opening act. Jackson grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've got a suspect in custody. Found narcotics in the vehicle. Repeat, narcotics in the vehicle." The words echoed in the night, heavy with false triumph. He wanted backup to see his catch. He wanted witnesses to his staged success. The man spoke again, his voice calm, steady, almost too steady. "You should really think about what you're doing." Jackson slammed his fist against the hood, leaning closer. "Don't tell me what to think. You're done. You hear me? Done." For a brief moment, their eyes met. Jackson's full of rage and arrogance, the man's unreadable. There was no panic, no fear, only patience, as though he were waiting for something inevitable. The tension thickened. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying an ominous chill. A passing car slowed for a moment, its driver staring at the surreal sight before speeding away. Jackson didn't care. He was lost in his own illusion of power. He strutted back to the black luxury car, shining his flashlight across the seats, pretending to search. His hand brushed against the planted drugs again, and his smirk widened. He rehearsed in his mind how he'd write the report, how convincing he'd make it sound. But as he glanced back at the cuffed man, a flicker of doubt sparked inside him. Why wasn't he resisting? Why wasn't he pleading? Why wasn't he even angry? Jackson had staged dozens of arrests before. He knew the signs. People cried, they begged, they cursed. But this man, he stood still, almost like he was waiting for the officer to trap himself deeper. "Who the hell are you?" Jackson muttered under his breath, though he'd never admit his growing unease. The man gave no reply, just that same calm stare. The officer turned back to his patrol car, grabbing his notepad. He scribbled down a few notes, building his case in his head. His arrogance returned. "Doesn't matter who he is," he thought. "Tonight he's just another name in my report." But the man's silence was louder than any words. Minutes ticked by like hours. Jackson checked his watch, impatient for backup to arrive. He wanted the scene crowded. He wanted other officers to admire his catch. The man shifted slightly, leaning against the hood more comfortably, as though he wasn't the one in handcuffs. The move infuriated Jackson. "Stand up straight," he barked. The man obliged, slowly, deliberately. His eyes, however, never left the officer, and in those eyes there was something Jackson couldn't quite understand, something that whispered, "Your time is running out." The setup was complete. The stage was set. Jackson thought he had trapped his suspect, but in reality, every second was pulling him closer to his own downfall. And the question that lingered in the night wasn't whether the man was guilty, but how long Jackson could survive the truth that was about to explode. The silence of the night pressed heavily against the flashing lights. Officer Jackson stood taller, puffing out his chest with pride as though he had conquered something great. To him, this wasn't just another arrest, it was proof. Proof of his authority, his control, his superiority. The black man remained cuffed against the hood of his own car. His breathing is steady, his posture unshaken. He looked like someone who had been here before, too many times, and knew exactly how the story usually ended. But tonight wasn't usual. Tonight, the script was already slipping away from Jackson's hands, though he couldn't see it yet. Jackson clutched the small packet of drugs, holding it up as though it were some sacred evidence. "Care to explain this?" he barked, shoving it in the man's face. The man slowly turned his head toward him, eyes calm, voice firm. "You planted that." The words landed like a slap. Jackson froze for half a second. No one had ever said it to his face so directly. His arrogance flared. He leaned in, jaw tight. "Excuse me? You think you can accuse me?" The man didn't flinch. His voice was steady, cutting through the night like steel. "I don't need to accuse you. You know what you did. And soon, others will too." A chill ran down Jackson's spine, but he fought it off, snapping into anger. He shoved the man harder against the hood, pressing his knee into his back. "You watch your mouth. You're going away for a long time." Jackson clicked on his radio, his voice loud and confident. "Dispatch, suspect in custody, possession of narcotics confirmed, requesting transport and the evidence collection team, static." Crackled in reply, then the operator's voice. "Copy that, Unit 47, back up en route." Satisfied, Jackson smirked. Soon others would arrive. Soon his version of the story would be locked into the official record. He glanced down at the man again, expecting to see panic or anger. Instead, he saw calm. That same unnerving calm. It infuriated him. "You don't get it, do you?" Jackson sneered. "Your life is over. People like you don't come back from this. The courts won't care. The system won't care. Once I write this report, you're finished." For the first time, the man smiled. A small, knowing smile. "Be very careful, officer. You're writing more than just a report tonight. You're writing your own ending." The words stung. Jackson stepped back, pacing in frustration. He hated the way this man spoke, like he knew something, like he was in control of a game Jackson thought he owned. Jackson turned toward the car again, flashlights sweeping across the seats, searching for more. If he could find just one more piece of evidence, his case would be bulletproof. He ripped through the glove box, searched under the seats, and shone the light across the trunk. Nothing. When he turned back, the man was still watching him, calm, composed, patient. Jackson snapped. "Stop looking at me like that," he shouted, his voice echoing in the night. "You think you're better than me? You think you can just sit there and smile while I put you away?" The man's voice was quiet, but the weight behind it was heavier than any shout. "I don't think. I know." Jackson's hands trembled slightly, though he clenched them into fists to hide it. He hated this, hated the way the man's words clawed under his skin. He wasn't used to suspects like this. He was used to fear, to begging, to anger. But this man wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even defensive. He was waiting. The distant hum of engines began to grow louder. Backup. Jackson straightened, adjusting his belt, preparing himself for the arrival of other units. He imagined their nods of approval, the pats on the back, the recognition. He imagined himself basking in glory while this criminal was shoved into the back of a van. But deep inside, a small, sharp voice whispered, "Something's wrong." The man lifted his head slightly as the sound of vehicles approached. His smile grew just barely. "They're not coming for me," he said quietly. "They're coming for you." Jackson's stomach dropped. For a moment, the flashing lights of the incoming SUVs felt less like backup and more like a storm closing in. He shook off the feeling, forcing his voice into strength again. "You'll regret those words." But in his heart, for the first time that night, Officer Jackson felt a ripple of doubt. The false accusation was complete. The trap was set, and what Jackson thought was his greatest victory was about to unravel into his greatest downfall. The road was no longer silent. The low rumble of engines grew louder with every second, headlights cutting through the dark as vehicles approached the scene. Officer Jackson's pulse quickened. He straightened his shoulders, smoothed his uniform, and gripped the packet of drugs like a badge of honor. This was the moment he lived for. Recognition. Backup would arrive, see what he had uncovered, and his story would be locked in place. The system always sided with the badge, and tonight, he believed, was no exception. But the man he had cuffed to the hood of the car remained unchanged, calm, unshaken, almost serene. The faintest smile rested on his lips, as if he were already 3 steps ahead. Jackson snapped at him. "Wipe that look off your face. You think this is a game? You're finished." The man tilted his head slightly, his voice measured, steady. "No, officer. The game hasn't even started." Jackson's fists tightened. He wanted to break. That composure, to see fear in those eyes. But no matter what he said, no matter how much force he used, the man remained unmoved. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. The first patrol unit pulled up. Sirens off, lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, walking toward Jackson with curious expressions. Jackson puffed his chest, holding up the packet of drugs like, "A prize! Caught him red-handed," Jackson announced loudly, eager for them to hear. "Narcotics hidden under the dashboard. Possession, intent to distribute." The officers exchanged quick glances, their faces unreadable. One nodded, the other jotted something down. They didn't praise him, they didn't question him, they simply observed. The man on the hood didn't move, didn't speak, but his silence felt louder with every passing second. Jackson forced a laugh. "Pretty good work, huh? Pulled him over, instincts kicked in, found this stashed where he thought I wouldn't look." Still, no reaction from the officers. They continued watching, their eyes occasionally flicking toward the cuffed man. Jackson turned back to him, sneering. "Got nothing to say now, do you?" For the first time, the man spoke louder, his voice carrying through the cold night. "Every word you've spoken tonight is digging your own grave." The 2 officers froze for just a moment, their eyes narrowing. Jackson scoffed, covering his unease with anger. "Grave? Please. You'll be lucky if you don't rot in a cell for the rest of your life." But inside, Jackson couldn't shake the strange atmosphere. Something was off. Backup wasn't behaving the way he expected. Where were the congratulatory nods? The praise? Instead, there was only quiet observation, as though they were waiting for something else. The rumble of more vehicles echoed in the distance. Not 1, not 2, but several. Heavy engines, deliberate, approaching fast. Jackson's eyes lit up with pride. This was it. More recognition, more validation. By morning, his name would be on every internal report. The man, however, simply closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply as though the storm he had been waiting for was finally here. When he opened them, he looked straight at Jackson and said, "It's time." Jackson felt a shiver crawl up his spine. "Time for what?" he snapped. But before the man could answer, the sound hit, a fleet of black SUVs pulling into the scene. Their engines roared with authority, their tinted windows reflecting the flashing lights. They didn't look like local police. They didn't move like local police. Jackson blinked, confused. He hadn't called for this many units. He hadn't expected this. Doors swung open in perfect unison. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, their presence commanding, their movements precise. They didn't waste time. They didn't even glance at Jackson. Their eyes went straight to the man in handcuffs. And then it happened. "Sir," one of them said firmly, approaching with respect. "We're here." Jackson's heart skipped. "Sir?" The man turned his head slightly, meeting Jackson's stunned expression with that same calm smile. "I warned you." The storm had arrived, and Officer Jackson was standing right in the middle of it, blind to just how close he was to destruction. The calm before the storm was over, the storm itself was only seconds away. The black SUVs lined the road like shadows of authority, their engines still rumbling even after the ignition cut. The air grew heavy, charged with something Jackson couldn't name. This wasn't backup. This wasn't the usual scene of police support. The doors opened, and figures stepped out. Sharp suits, earpieces, polished shoes hitting the asphalt, in unison. Their movements were crisp, deliberate, too disciplined for local cops. They didn't so much as glance at Jackson. Their focus was locked on the man pinned against the hood, the one Jackson had paraded as a criminal. And then came the word that shattered the officer's confidence. "Sir." The first agent, tall and imposing, spoke with respect. "Are you all right?" Jackson's jaw slackened. His grip on the drug packet faltered. "Sir?" The man in handcuffs lifted his head slowly. That calm smile returned, not arrogant, not smug, but certain, like someone who had always known this moment was coming. "I'm fine," he replied simply, his tone carrying more weight than any shouted command. Two agents immediately moved toward him. Their hands weren't rough like Jackson's had been. They didn't shove or yank. With practiced precision, they unlocked the handcuffs, almost as if it were an insult that he'd been restrained in the first place. Jackson stepped forward, confusion boiling into anger. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? He's under arrest. Possession of narcotics, intent to distribute. I found the evidence myself." The agents didn't even look at him. One of them tucked the cuffs away, while another checked the man's wrists to make sure no harm had been done. The scene felt surreal, like the entire script had been rewritten in an instant, and Jackson wasn't part of it anymore. The man stretched his wrists slightly, then turned to face Jackson, fully for the first time since the stop began. His voice was calm, but this time there was authority in every syllable. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" Jackson sputtered, clutching the packet of drugs as if it were a shield. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A criminal. You think just because you've got friends in suits you can walk away? No chance." The man stepped closer, the agents instinctively moving with him, a protective barrier at his sides. His eyes locked onto Jackson's. There was no smile now, just a steady, piercing look that seemed to strip away every layer of Jackson's false confidence. "You planted evidence," the man said plainly. "You abused your badge. You used your position not to serve the law, but to twist it for your own pride. That ends tonight." The words hit Jackson like a blow. He opened his mouth to fire back, but the agents shifted slightly, and for the first time he noticed the insignias, the subtle pins, the badges that weren't police. They were federal. His stomach turned cold. Who are you?" Jackson demanded, though his voice cracked on the last word. The man paused, letting the silence drag just long enough for the weight to settle. Then, with deliberate calm, he reached into his jacket pocket, not hurried, not afraid. He pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open, and revealed an ID card that gleamed under the flashing lights. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Director. Jackson staggered back a step, his mind spinning. The words blurred in his vision. but the title burned clear. FBI Director. The man, the one he had mocked, shoved, and accused, was the highest authority in federal law enforcement. And Jackson had just handcuffed him, planted drugs on him, and called him a criminal. The director's gaze didn't waver. "I gave you chances," he said quietly. "I warned you more than once. But arrogance blinds men like you." Jackson's breath quickened. His hands trembled. For the first time that night, the packet of drugs felt heavy, poisonous in his grip. He tried to form words, excuses, anything. But nothing came out. The director looked to the agents. "Document everything. I want every second of this recorded, and make sure his department gets a copy." "Yes, Director," they replied in unison. Jackson felt his knees weaken. The reality crashed down on him like a tidal wave. His victory was gone. His career was gone. His freedom, maybe even that, was hanging by a thread, and the man he thought was prey had just revealed himself as the predator all along. The reveal was complete, but for Jackson, the nightmare was only beginning. The night air felt colder now, heavy with the weight of revelation. The flashing lights no longer looked like victory to Officer Jackson. They mocked him, illuminating the truth he could no longer escape. The man he had accused, handcuffed, and humiliated stood free, flanked by federal agents, his badge of authority gleaming in the darkness. FBI Director. The words echoed in Jackson's skull, louder than the sirens, louder than his own racing heartbeat. His chest tightened as realization sank deeper. He hadn't just framed a man. He had framed the most powerful law enforcement officer in the country. The director stood tall, adjusting his suit as if brushing off the dirt of Jackson's arrogance. His presence commanded the space in a way no badge or gun could. Even the other officers on scene now stood straighter, their eyes averted out of respect. Jackson's mouth went dry. Still, desperation clawed at him, pushing him to speak. "This is a mistake. I didn't know who you were. I thought—" The director raised a hand, silencing him instantly. His voice was calm but sharp, every word cutting like glass. "You thought you could manipulate the law. You thought planting evidence would make you powerful. But you forgot. Something crucial, officer." Jackson swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "And what's that?" The director's eyes burned into him. "That the law sees everything, and justice always catches up." The agents moved closer, one of them already holding a tablet, scrolling through live feeds and recordings. Jackson's stomach twisted when he realized what it was. Body cameras, dash cameras, surveillance units that had been trailing the director long before Jackson stopped him. Every second of Jackson's crime was on record. "No," Jackson muttered, shaking his head. His confidence crumbled. He clutched the drug packet like a lifeline, but now it felt like evidence against him. Which it was. "No, this isn't right. You set me up." The director stepped closer, his voice low, steady, impossible to argue with. "I didn't set you up. I gave you every chance to do the right thing. I told you that you were making a mistake. You laughed. You shoved me. You lied. And you thought you were untouchable." The director leaned in just enough that Jackson could see the fire in his eyes. "You're not untouchable. Not anymore." Jackson stumbled backwards, his knees threatening to give out. The other officers, who once might have stood at his side, now kept their distance. Their silence was damning. He was alone. One of the agents addressed the director. "Sir, do you want us to proceed?" The director didn't take his eyes off Jackson. "Yes, place him under arrest. Full charges, abuse of power, evidence tampering, false arrest, civil rights violations. Make sure the department, the DA, and internal affairs all receive the report tonight." "Yes, sir." Jackson's hands shook as two agents stepped toward him. He raised his palms in panic. Wait, please, I didn't mean it. I didn't know. If I'd known who you were. The director's expression hardened. So, if I were just another man on the street, your actions would be justified? The question hit harder than any accusation. Jackson's lips quivered, but no answer came. The truth was written all over his silence. The director nodded, his disappointment heavier than anger. That's the problem with officers like you. You don't serve the badge. You serve yourself. And you disgrace everyone who truly protects and upholds the law. The agents closed in, grabbing Jackson's wrists and snapping the cuffs into place, the same cuffs he had so proudly used earlier. The click echoed, this time not as a symbol of control, but of defeat. Jackson's knees buckled. He pleaded, his voice cracking. Please, I have a family. I'll lose everything. The director's gaze softened only slightly, but his voice remained unwavering. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy someone else's life for your own pride. The agents began leading Jackson toward one of the black SUVs. The other officers looked on, silent, ashamed, some even turning away from the sight. The man who had strutted with arrogance minutes ago now stumbled like a broken shadow. The director stood still, watching. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply delivered the words that sealed Jackson's fate. Justice. Doesn't care about your excuses. It only cares about the truth. As Jackson was shoved into the SUV, the road returned to silence. The flashing lights reflected off the director's ID one last time before he tucked it back into his jacket. The calm authority he carried was undeniable. The storm had broken, and Officer Jackson's world lay in ruins. But for the director, this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a reminder, for everyone watching, that corruption, no matter how small or how bold, always meets its end. The predator had been unmasked. The hunter had become the hunted. And justice had spoken. The black SUV door slammed shut with a hollow metallic thud, leaving Jackson shackled inside, staring at the tinted glass like it was the wall of a tomb. The cuffs dug into his wrists, his chest heaved with shallow breaths, and for the first time since he had put on the uniform, he felt the full weight of disgrace pressing down on him. The vehicle moved forward, its engine growling as it carried him into the unknown, while his thoughts spun in circles of panic and regret. 2 days later, the fluorescent lights of a federal interrogation room burned into his eyes. The gray walls offered no comfort, no escape. His lawyer whispered frantic advice about possible plea bargains, but Jackson barely listened. He couldn't stop replaying the moment, the instant the man revealed his badge. FBI Director. The title still echoed, like thunder in his mind. He had been arrogant enough to plant drugs on the most powerful law enforcement officer in the country. And now, there was no way out. The door creaked open, and the director himself stepped in with 2 agents. Jackson's blood turned cold. He struggled to sit upright, forcing a weak smile that quickly died on his lips. Director, sir, please, I didn't know. I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking. I didn't know who you were. The director didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone silenced the room. He sat opposite Jackson, leaned forward, and spoke in a tone that was calm but sharp enough to cut through excuses. That's the problem. You keep saying you didn't know who I was. Tell me this. If I had just been another black man driving down that road, would you have treated me any differently? Jackson's mouth opened, but no words came. His lawyer fidgeted beside him, adjusting his papers, but there was no argument to be made. The truth was already clear. The director continued, each word measured, deliberate. You weren't just reckless, you were dangerous. You turned your badge into a weapon. You destroyed the trust that others worked to build, and you thought you were untouchable. But justice doesn't bend to arrogance. Jackson dropped his gaze, his shoulders slumping as sweat slid down his temple. He tried to speak, to beg, but the words lodged in his throat, The director's stare didn't waver. "You disgraced your uniform. Now, you will answer for it." Weeks later, the trial began, and the entire country was watching. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, microphones thrust forward as cameras flashed like lightning. The case dominated every headline. Officer accused of planting evidence on FBI director. Jackson shuffled into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, wrists and ankles shackled, the badge that once gave him power, now nothing more than a memory. The prosecution's evidence was devastating. Body cam footage showed every shove, every sneer, every moment he mocked the man he thought was powerless. Dash cam recordings revealed the moment he planted the drugs. Witnesses testified to his arrogance and abuse of power. And then came the testimony that sealed his fate, the director himself. The room went silent when he took the stand. He didn't rant or rage. He didn't exaggerate. He simply told the truth. How Jackson stopped him without cause, how he was mocked, shoved, and handcuffed, how the drugs were slipped into his car. The jury didn't need drama. The facts spoke louder than anything else. Jackson sat motionless, unable to meet the director's eyes. The defense tried to paint him as overworked, stressed, a man who cracked under pressure. But the evidence was overwhelming. And when the verdict was read, the words cut through the courtroom like a blade, guilty on all counts. Jackson's world collapsed. His badge was revoked, his pension gone, his reputation destroyed. His family, seated in the gallery, didn't rush to his side. Their faces showed not sympathy but sorrow and shame. When he was sentenced to years in federal prison, he felt the last thread of his former life snap. Prison stripped away everything. No rank, no authority, no allies. Just another inmate in a gray jumpsuit, living with the same walls and bars he had once used to contain others. At night, lying on the thin mattress of his cell, the director's words haunted him. "You don't serve the badge. You serve yourself." He finally understood, but too late to change anything. Outside those prison walls, the FBI director stood before cameras and the nation. His voice was steady, his message clear. This case is not just about one corrupt officer. It is about accountability. The badge is not a license to abuse. It is a responsibility to protect. When trust is broken, justice must be served. And let this remind us all, no one is above the law, not even those who enforce it. The speech echoed across televisions, radios, and headlines. Communities that had long doubted justice saw proof that truth could prevail. Officers who honored their oath felt vindicated, and corrupt men who thought themselves untouchable began to look over their shoulders, wondering when their turn would come. Back in his cell, Jackson sat alone, staring at the blank concrete wall, the silence deafening. He was no longer Officer Jackson. He was no longer anyone. The power he abused had buried him, and the justice he thought he could twist had crushed him. His downfall was complete, a warning carved into his life for others to see. And far away, in his office overlooking the city, the FBI director returned to his work. Not with pride, not with revenge, but with resolve. Justice had spoken. Corruption had fallen, and the message was clear. Justice always wins. If you enjoy these stories, make sure to subscribe to Black Battlers so you never miss the next one. Your subscription gives us the power to bring you even more emotional and inspiring stories. Join the Black Battlers family today.